Lesson 8.1, Physical and Cultural Landscapes. Hi class, how you doing? I hope you're all having a great day. I see all those pretty smiling faces looking at me through the screen. We're going to talk about how geography affects people and how people affect geography. So we're looking at this picture here. We're looking at Appalachian Mountain folks, and Appalachian Mountains are on the side of Virginia, so most of you would probably know where they are. The Appalachian Mountain folks live in a very difficult environment. It's mostly all mountainous area without too much flat land for farming. Although I do hear that they do a lot of hunting. Now the situation that they live in may have been changing in the last few years, but this is a picture that just shows a family there, or a group of people anyway, that are entertaining each other and the photographer. And you can see they have their own way of making music. They have the banjo out and the guitar out. Nobody has any really fancy looking clothes. Their hairstyles are not really up to date, so they're living in a very poor environment, but most of them are smiling, so that's good. They're very happy with their lives, it looks like. Okay, so let's get into the real part of the meat of the lesson here. The early civilizations of Earth. In the early years of civilization, so very, very far back in our past, the physical environment had a major impact on people's lives. People could only settle where there was a source of fresh water, and if an area was too hot or too cold or too mountainous, most people would not want to settle there. And that's because they had to rely only on what was there naturally. They didn't really have the resources, the technology to do much about it, so they had to accept it the way it was and live there the way that the environment was. So they actually had to change their location to an environment that worked rather than making the environment work for them. So people also learned to adapt or adjust their behavior, which is the meaning of the word adapt, to take advantage of their environment. Early Americans in the Southwest desert learned to grow crops that needed very little rain, and that's obviously because they were in a desert. They built sprawling irrigation systems. Sprawling means spread out a lot over a large area. Ditches and canals that brought water to dry areas. So they were able to grow their crops there because they could get water to the crops. People built their houses from bricks that they cut from the soil, the clay soil, and dried in the sun. So they didn't have any wood because it was a desert, so they didn't have trees. But they could build from the clay soil and make bricks out of it and then build their houses. When a drought came along, these people abandoned their villages in search of a more suitable environment. So a drought is a long period without much rain, and they would just give up on the place that they were settling and go find some place that did have water, because they really couldn't do a whole lot about getting water there if there was not any close by. Even irrigation systems rely on having some water close by. Okay, let's look at annual precipitation in Arizona, and this is part of the area where we're talking about that has the very arid, dry places that from the previous screen. And we're going to also look at using a map key while we're looking at this map. So the map key is that little section down in the corner of the map that says precipitation in inches. And you can see that the color goes from a light blue and all the way through different stages of blue till it gets to a very dark blue at the bottom. Looking at the little numbers beside each of those little squares of color, it will tell you what that color means on the map. So the light blue means that there's very little precipitation, only 3 to 11 inches per year. So that's definitely very little. And then you go all the way down in different stages until you get down to the dark blue, which is 29 to 45 inches in a year. Okay, so now we've read the key, and we're going to look for those color codes on the map so we can see what that map is trying to tell us. So what the map tells us about Arizona is there's a lot of dry areas, and there's a few spots that have a good amount of precipitation, but they're mostly in spots, not spread out through the whole state. Now, just for comparison, here in Virginia where we live, that wouldn't be the case. It would be pretty much the dark blue all the way through, because we have not an arid, dry desert area around here, so that would be totally different look than this. Based on the amount of rain in the area, where do you think these people would likely settle? Okay, remember, they need to settle near some water, some fresh water, so they can grow things and they have water to drink and so forth. Okay, so let's look at the part of the answer to that question. The precipitation in Arizona and the cities. What cities are located in areas that have the most precipitation? Let's look at that. So looking at the key again, and I'm sorry this is out of focus a little bit, but I thought this was really an applicable map for us to use. Average precipitation in a year, it says at the bottom there. The blue is 120 centimeters, and it goes all the way down to whether, I don't know if that's a 2 or a 1, but the brownish orange looking color there is very low level of precipitation. So what cities are located in the areas that have the most precipitation? It would be the ones that's in the blue areas. So let's look at the map, and that would make it Flagstaff and Nogales. Then we have areas that are located right around the area that has the green close to it, but not right in it, like Phoenix. Phoenix is still in a relatively dry area, but it's close to an area that has water. And you can also see that there's a couple of different rivers nearby Phoenix. And then Tucson is kind of in the green area. It's kind of hard to tell. It might be green, it might be yellow, but it's right on the border. Douglas looks like it's in a green area down at the bottom there. And then we have the two cities that are located in areas that have little rainfall, which is not what we were learning in the first part of this lesson. And those people would not settle where there was not enough water. So I'm kind of guessing that they came along later, after there was ways to get water to them that the earlier settlers couldn't have done. So let's look at Kingman, and it's in a yellow area, so it doesn't have the completely driest area, but it's pretty close. Then we have Yuma, which is very dry, so it's in a desert. So, but they do have a river right there beside them. So, and I think actually the border of the state is actually a river. It looks like it. Usually they do use a lot of rivers as borders for states. So that might be right on the river, whatever that river is that's going from north to south. So what do you think that some of these cities might have been growing up in the places that they are in. I'll leave that to you to think about and figure out. Okay, other effects of geography. Geography continually influences the world. It never stops. It's always continually influencing the world. When European colonists arrived in North America, they looked for good geographic features to decide where to build their first towns. English, Spanish, and others looked for a good source of fresh water and access to the sea. So they needed fresh water so that they could grow things and they could drink it, cook with it. And then they wanted access to the sea so that they could send and receive supplies from across the ocean over in their homelands, so England or Spain or wherever they're from. They wanted land that was flat enough to farm and also had materials for building. So Jamestown, Virginia was the very first settlement that the English-speaking people had set up over here in our country. Now, why was Jamestown, Virginia chosen? Well, because, for one thing, the ships could sail into the Chesapeake Bay from the ocean and then up the deep James River, which was deep enough for their ships, to reach Jamestown, so they could actually get their ships all the way up to Jamestown and dock them anywhere around the edge of Jamestown there on that peninsula. The map shows several different rivers and creeks nearby and a wooded area for use in building homes. So you can see some of the pictures are for trees. They look kind of they don't look so much like trees, but there's some pictures of trees in there, and that's what that's for, just so you can see the landscape is. This map, by the way, is actually for the Civil War, but we're not really using that part of the map. We're just looking at the terrain and the geography of it. Now, Jamestown is also a peninsula, which means water surrounds it on three sides. Not all the way around, but on three sides of it at least. And so it is easy to defend against enemies approaching by land, especially the Powhatan Indians. So they were the ones that were native to that area, and of course they were not thrilled to have strangers come and take over their land and start building there and growing things. So they would attack and try to drive them off. But the settlers knew that there were going to be Indians in the area. They already had enough experience from sending settlers over to the North America that they knew that that's going to happen. So they had to choose a place that they could defend from the Indians. Jamestown would also be less likely to be attacked by enemy ships because it was inland and not on the Chesapeake Bay coast or even on the Atlantic coast. So the ships had to come all the way down the river, and by the time they could get all the way down the river, then Jamestown would be aware of them, so they could defend themselves a lot better. But later it became apparent that the geography of Jamestown had major drawbacks. It was swampy and humid, so the ground had a lot of water, standing water, and the air had a lot of water in it too. So that made it very difficult to live, to grow things. And the water was also unhealthy. It bred mosquitoes, and that created the threat of malaria, which is a disease carried by mosquitoes. The crops were hard to grow in the damp climate, climate meaning general weather conditions and soil. And many settlers died from disease or starvation, and the colony nearly failed. When they say the colony nearly failed, a failed colony would be one that any survivors that they had finally given up on trying to live there would sail back to their home country, or everybody died. So that would be what would be considered a failed colony. Geography in the American Revolution. So geography again played an important part when the colonists rose up against the British in the American Revolutionary War. Colonists got tired of having Britain rule over them from afar, and they rose up in revolution to remove the government. Because the British government was so far from its colonies, supplies took weeks to reach the British troops, if not months. So they couldn't get a hold of anything quick if they needed it. Because the war was spread all along the entire North American coast, the British found their resources stretched too thin. So the British couldn't get the resources even when they could get supplies. They couldn't get them to the farthest parts of their troops because of the area was so far away. These factors contributed to the success of the American Revolution, and revolution meaning the overthrow of a government in this context anyway. Now, people affect geography, and that's the opposite of what we were talking about, geography affecting people. Now we're talking about people affecting geography. As the population of the 13 colonies grew, more food was needed. There was not enough farmland near the coast, so people moved west to find good farmland. This caused the United States to expand. So obviously we are affecting the geography in those ways. At the same time that people are adapting to their environment, they are also often changing the environment. So here's some of the changes that have occurred. Settlers cleared forests and planted crops. They built roads and bridges. In the 1860s, thousands of miles of railroads were laid. When the steel plow was invented, farmers tilled acres of grassland. So the grassland was no longer grassland. It was now tilled up land for a farm. Grassland was mostly out in the plains area of the western part of the continent. All of this activity disturbed the environment of the Great Plains and led to massive dust storms in the 1930s. And because of growing industrialization, people flocked to the cities to work. High-rise apartments were built to house workers. Okay, now at this point, I found a really good video on YouTube about the Dust Bowl. It's only about 4 minutes long, so it won't take you very long, but it has some very interesting pictures and a lot of good information for you in there. So I want you to go ahead and stop what we're doing here and jump over to that presentation that's there in the Google Classroom for you, and then come back when you're done watching that. Well, I hope you all got back here with us to finish up talking about the Dust Bowl video that we looked at. Very interesting, isn't it? How would you like to have lived in a place like that? It looks like it's very scary to me. You can see that the farming practices in the Great Plains area leading up to the 1930s clearly caused a great deal of damage to the environment. And this is just taken from a comment in the movie, but I thought it was interesting, and so I thought we would look into it a little bit. What do you think rain will follow the plow means? The narrator called this a mistaken belief. So why would people have believed rain would follow the plow? So let's look at what that actually is trying to say. It's trying to say, from what I interpret, that once the people start plowing up the ground for a farm, for plants, that it will then start raining in an area that maybe didn't have enough rain to start with. But it's going to start raining there because people have plowed up the land. That sounds kind of screwy to us, I'm sure. It does to you, but it does to me for sure. But at that point, when those people, the settlers, moved out that way, a lot of them believed that, and this was the reason why they settled in the areas that they settled in. That they thought that if they plowed up the land, then they would get the rain that they needed for the plants. Now, why would they have thought that? Good guess of yours is just as good as my guess, but I'm thinking that it's just that for so many generations of people, centuries possibly, that have plowed up the land, that obviously they were successful enough to grow plants there, and that so they were able to stay there after they started growing plants. But that would mean that the people that thought this was rain would follow the plow had not really understood that the reason why those people actually could grow plants there was not because they plowed up the ground first and then the rain followed. It was really because they chose a place where there was rain and then they plowed there. Definitely a mistaken idea if they got that all backwards. Technology advances that affect geography. As technology advances, people have more control over their environment. And of course, that's one of the main reasons why we try to advance in technology, is so that we will have control over the environment. It's something that we want. Irrigation systems bring water to the desert. Engineers blast through mountains and drain wetlands. Tunnels bored through the Earth's surface are used by motorists every day. Phone and cable lines are strung along nearly every highway. Humans have even altered the environment above Earth by sending satellites and space stations into orbit. Okay, now what happens after those technology advances, the effects? The activity of all this technology advances has important benefits. Improved transportation and communications, and a more varied and greater food supply. Both of those are very important, and we're glad to have been able to achieve those. But there are costs for these advances. Human activity causes air and water pollution. Growing cities and desert areas have strained water supplies. So the people out there in Arizona and some other areas in the west that have very little water but still have cities there have to have water brought in from long distances for the city to survive. Lately, there have been a lot of problems with having enough water to go to the cities as the cities grow. So that's becoming to be a very big problem there. The clearing of the rainforest in Brazil and other tropical areas has had far-reaching consequences. So think about the clearing of the rainforest. The reason that makes any difference, the rainforests have a huge amount of plants in them, trees and all kinds of other plants. All those green plants are needed for the carbon dioxide on this world to be transformed back into oxygen. And we need the oxygen for plants and people to be able to live. If they cut down a lot of the green parts of the world, the rainforest is a great large amounts of green parts of the world, then there's not enough oxygen, and it can cause loss of plant and animal life. The changes in the environment causes flooding, and it also causes global climate change. And we are all starting to experience all of those effects of global climate change now. So in conclusion for this lesson, even if we only look at North America, which is what we've done in this lesson, it is clear to see that geography has influenced people, and people have also influenced geography. As population growth and global warming continue, people and the earth will experience more changes. It is up to us to try to control and improve these influences so that future generations can still have healthy and happy lives. We have a lot of professionals, scientists throughout the whole world working on how to help control these influences so that we do not destroy our planet, and so that we can have future generations have healthy and happy lives. And possibly some of you will be interested in going into career fields that would include those kind of operations. That would be really great. Okay, I'll see you in the next lesson. In the meantime, don't forget you have a little quiz to complete after you finish watching this video. And you also will have the files in the Google Classroom of your actual textbook for this lesson, if you'd like to look it up in the textbook. And there's also some good exercises in the textbook that we don't get to in these lessons on the videos that you might want to go into. See you then.